If we start raising taxes on the rich, are they all just going to pack up, jump on a jet, and leave you with the bill? Every week, the news cycle makes it sound like that's exactly what's happening. Millionaires escaping New York, tech founders bailing on California, wealthy Brits swapping London's rain for Dubai's sunshine. So, if the rich are supposedly running for the exits, who's left to pay for schools, roads, and hospitals? Is squeezing the top really a smart move? Or are we just chasing money out of the country? Here's the twist. That scary story you keep hearing is, at best, half true. When you actually look at the data and how rich people really make decisions, the picture is almost the opposite of what you've been told. In this video, as a finance guy who spends way too much time buried in numbers and tax reports, I'm going to show you the side of this debate nobody puts in the headline, and what it really means for your wallet, not just for billionaires. Let's talk about the biggest myth in this whole debate. If you tax the rich, they'll just leave. You hear this every single time there's talk about raising taxes on high earners. Politicians say it, lobbyists repeat it, and the media loves to throw gasoline on the fire. You'll see the same highlight reel over and over again. Elon Musk leaving California, tech bros moving to Austin, hedge fund guys buying homes in Florida or Texas because there's no state income tax. And the story they want you to believe is pretty simple. Touch the top 1% and they hit the eject button. Game over for your economy. But here's where the numbers quietly disagree. If rich people are supposedly fleeing high-tax places, why has the number of millionaires in New York City actually increased compared to a decade ago? Why do countries with relatively high taxes, like France, Germany, the Netherlands, still see the wealth of their rich continue to grow over time, not collapse?
I'm not saying no one ever moves for tax reasons. Some do. But the idea that there's this giant, unstoppable rich people exodus every time tax rates go up, that's more of an emotional scare tactic than a scientific conclusion. It works because it hits two of our biggest fears at once: fear that the rich have all the power, and fear that if they leave, the rest of us are screwed. In reality, when you zoom out and look at the data instead of the headlines, the story is way less dramatic and way more interesting. In the next part, I'll show you what actually drives most wealthy people to stay put, even when their tax bill goes up.
Now, to really understand this debate, we need to talk about something called the Laffer Curve. Don't worry, I'll keep this human. The basic idea is simple. If tax rates are too low, the government doesn't collect much money. If tax rates are too high, people work less, invest less, or find ways around the system. So, again, the government doesn't collect much money. Somewhere in the middle, there's a sweet spot where tax rates are high enough to bring in serious revenue, but not so high that they crush economic activity. That sweet spot is what people call the revenue maximizing point on the Laffer curve. Now, here's how this concept gets abused. Every time someone talks about raising taxes on the rich, you'll hear, "Careful, we're already on the bad side of the Laffer curve. If we raise rates, revenue will actually go down." That sounds clever. It sounds sophisticated. But when economists actually run the numbers across advanced economies, a very different picture shows up. Studies looking at multiple developed countries, including the US, suggest that most of us are still on the left side of that curve. In plain English, we're below the point where higher tax rates would start shrinking total tax revenue. In fact, for countries like the United States, Mexico, Slovakia, and others, the optimal top tax rate, the one that would maximize revenue, is estimated to be higher than what they charge today, which means there's still theoretical room to raise taxes on top earners without blowing up the tax base. That doesn't automatically mean we should crank rates up to the max. Tax policy isn't just about squeezing every last dollar out of people. It's also about fairness, incentives, and what kind of society you want. But here's the key takeaway. When someone waves the Laffer curve at you to argue that any tax increase on the rich will instantly backfire, they're not really quoting economics. They're quoting a talking point. The data, at least so far, tells a much more nuanced story than the slogans do. When people talk about taxing the rich, they act like wealthy folks are just walking spreadsheets with a passport. change a percentage point here, and boom, private jet to Miami, problem solved. But if you actually look at how high-income people make decisions, taxes are one factor, not the factor. If you're a founder, an executive, or an investor, here's what really matters. Your network. Who can you grab coffee with? Other CEOs, VCs, deal makers, top lawyers? Business opportunity. Is this where the big contracts, investors, and talent are? Financial infrastructure. Are there banks, funds, advisors, and legal teams that understand complex deals and can move fast? Lifestyle and family. Are there good schools for your kids? A community you fit into? A culture you actually enjoy living in? Take New York City. It's expensive. State and city taxes are high. On paper, it looks like a terrible deal. And yet, it's still one of the densest hubs of millionaires and financial power in the world. Because if you're in high finance, media, big law, or certain types of tech, New York is where the action is. Same with Silicon Valley. Insane housing prices, not exactly a tax haven, tons of headaches. But if you're building a serious tech company, the investors, engineers, and partners you need are often clustered right there. The upside from just being in that ecosystem can dwarf the extra tax you pay. Here's the simple truth. You don't walk away from your clients, your entire network, your kid's school, and the place where you can make 10 times more money just to shave a few percentage points off your tax bill. For most wealthy people, tax is a line item. Opportunity, power, access, and quality of life. That's what really pins them to a place. Here's the third uncomfortable truth. When it comes to rich people fleeing, the numbers are basically rounding error. If you look at global wealth data, we're talking about tens of millions of millionaires worldwide. But each year, only a tiny fraction of them actually pick up, change countries, and start a new life somewhere else. We're not talking about a tidal wave. It's more like a light drizzle. And when researchers dig into why those people move, taxes usually aren't at the top of the list. They're moving because there's a war or rising conflict where they live. Political instability is making the future unpredictable. They want better safety for their family. They're retiring and chasing lifestyle, weather, healthcare, pace of life. In other words, they're acting like humans, not just tax optimization robots. But if you only followed the headlines, you'd think we're in the middle of a mass millionaire evacuation every time a government tweaks the tax code. That's because a few thousand wealthy people quietly adjusted their residency for complex reasons doesn't get clicks. Rich people are leaving in droves does. So the next time you see a dramatic article about millionaire migration, remember, they're building a story around a fraction of the rich. Statistically, it's close to 0%. And building tax policy around that tiny sliver is like redesigning an entire city because 3 people moved out of your neighborhood. London is actually a really interesting exception in this whole tax the rich and they'll flee story. For years, London wasn't just a rich city. It was a magnet for foreign wealth, especially the kind of wealth that wanted to stay off the radar. If you were a billionaire who wanted to minimize taxes, park assets in shell companies, or quietly move money around the world, London's property market and financial system made that surprisingly easy. Fancy townhouses, offshore companies, opaque ownership structures. It was a playground for people who cared more about secrecy than about contributing to the local economy. Then, the UK started tightening the rules. More scrutiny on unexplained wealth. Tougher anti-money laundering rules. More pressure to reveal who actually owns what. And guess what happened? Some of that footloose money left. The headlines framed it like, "Oh no, the rich are escaping London." But from an economic point of view, that's not necessarily a tragedy. If your city was full of people who bought houses they barely live in, pushed up prices for everyone else, and did most of their real business offshore, losing that group doesn't hollow out your productive economy. In some ways, it cleans it up. Meanwhile, the number of people who actually built their wealth inside the UK, entrepreneurs, professionals, long-term residents, has continued to grow over time. And that's the real lesson here. Not all rich people are the same. If the ones leaving are the least rooted, least productive, and most focused on hiding money, their exit might look scary in the headlines. But for the health of the system, it can actually be a win. Here's the fifth truth that almost never gets talked about. The real risk to an economy isn't rich people leaving. It's talented people leaving. Losing one billionaire makes for a dramatic headline. But losing a steady stream of doctors, engineers, teachers, managers, nurses, coders, scientists, small business owners, that's what quietly guts a country over time. Think about who actually keeps an economy running day to day. The surgeon doing 12-hour shifts, the engineer designing your power grid or your phone, the mid-level manager making sure a company with 2,000 employees doesn't fall apart, the young graduate with big ideas who might start the next great business, if they stay. These people are what economists call human capital, skills, experience, and knowledge that you can't just print or import overnight. If they start leaving because the schools are crumbling, the infrastructure is failing, the politics are chaotic, or they don't feel safe, that's when you're in real trouble. And notice something. Most of these people can't just flip a switch and move purely for tax reasons. A doctor can't instantly transfer licenses. A teacher can't automatically walk into a new system abroad. Families have roots. Degrees don't always carry over. Immigration rules are strict. So if a country or a city reaches the point where even these people are willing to go through all of that pain just to get out, taxes are the least of your problems. That's a sign the deeper systems, healthcare, governance, security, opportunity, are breaking down. That's why I don't buy into the doom story that taxing the rich will make the whole economy collapse. Well-designed taxes on high incomes don't destroy a country, but neglecting your institutions, making professionals feel hopeless, letting your best minds see no future at home, that can absolutely collapse an economy, slowly and then all at once. Let's zoom in on the US for a second, because this is where the "they'll all leave" story really falls apart. If you're a billionaire in America, you're not just choosing between tax rates. You're sitting on top of some of the most valuable ecosystems on the planet. Silicon Valley, the deepest pool of tech talent, venture capital, and startup experience anywhere in the world. Wall Street, still the beating heart of global finance and capital markets. Hollywood, the global machine for media, branding, and cultural influence. And on top of that, the largest consumer market in the world right in your backyard. These aren't just nice-to-haves. For a lot of ultra-wealthy Americans, these are their money printers, their networks, their deals, their influence, their exits. All of it is tightly tied to these US-based hubs. So sure, they could move to some low-tax jurisdiction, save a chunk on their tax bill, but if that means less access to the best talent, fewer deals, weaker distribution, and being further from the action, that saving can end up being incredibly expensive. Some economic research has even suggested that you could crank top marginal tax rates in the US much higher, north of levels people would ever consider politically realistic. And most high earners still wouldn't give up their access to the American system. Why? Because for them, the US isn't just a place they live. It's the platform that makes their level of wealth possible in the first place. So let's zoom out and put all of this together. First, rich people rarely pack up and leave just because of taxes. It makes a great story, but it's not how most wealth behaves in the real world. Second, the actual migration of millionaires is tiny, a fraction of a percent globally. It looks big in headlines, but economically it barely moves the needle. Third, what really anchors wealth is opportunity. Where the deals are, where the talent is, where the markets are. That matters far more than a few points on a tax rate. Fourth, not all rich people are equal from an economic standpoint. If the ones leaving are anonymous shell company owners parking money and distorting housing markets, their exit can actually strengthen the system. And finally, the real asset you can't afford to lose isn't capital, it's people. The skilled workers, builders, and thinkers who keep a country functional. So no, taxing the rich in a smart, targeted way does not automatically destroy an economy. But misunderstanding taxes, building policy around fear, and neglecting the humans who make the system work? That absolutely can.